Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday right here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson, coming up on today's show. As Donald Trump takes to social media to thank supporters and the Secret Service, I'll be speaking to his pastor to find out how the former president is holding up after a second attempt on his life. Also ahead, I'll be speaking to the human rights activist and philanthropist Martin Luther King III about political violence in the United States and what it means for this election. And as lawmakers call for additional security measures for the former president, we ask, how did a gunman get that close to a presidential candidate? Welcome. Thanks for joining us. The second attempted assassination of Donald Trump at the former president's International Golf Club in West Palm Beach, Florida, has gripped the world today. This comes just 2 months since Donald Trump was shot at a rally in Pennsylvania, and this latest incident is raising some very serious questions about the safety of US presidential candidates. Well, for more, we can cross to Washington and speak to our correspondent there, Caroline Malone. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Caroline. Another major incident surrounding Donald Trump's security. Any further details emerging as to just what happened on Sunday?
Well, we've actually heard on Monday itself that the suspect, Ryan Wesley Roth, has actually appeared in court, in a federal court in Florida. He has been charged with possession of weapons and also possession of a weapon in which the serial number was disguised. So it sounds like illegal possession of weapons there. It's also been revealed that actually he has had convictions in the past. He has also faced the law before. This is not his first time in a courtroom, but indeed, he found guilty on these charges and potentially, suspected attempted assassination of Trump. He could be in jail for a very long time. We'll find out in a couple of weeks. He's been arraigned from that courtroom and he will appear again in a couple of weeks. Now, in terms of the events from Sunday, it appears that Secret Service saw him ahead of Trump arriving at that part of the golf course. They were sweeping areas of the golf course ahead of where Trump was playing. They saw the barrel of a gun sticking out through a fence into the bushes, into the golf course. They actually opened fire onto this suspect. He fled, though. He managed to get away from the golf course. And it was thanks to a witness who appears to have identified this person and also seen the license plate of his car that then security officials were able to track him down. And they didn't track him down until he got to the neighboring county where he was, in fact, arrested. This is the second attempted assassination of Trump in just a matter of months. And of course, there'll be a lot of scrutiny on the Secret Service because of it. Okay, so this 58-year-old suspect is in custody, as you say. What more are we finding out about him and just what might have motivated him? Well, as well as some of the criminal cases that he has been involved in the past, he's also been investigated for tax evasion and other types of crimes. He's prolific on social media as well. He posted that he voted for Trump in 2016 but was disappointed with him. He then came out more in support of the Democrats and said it was important that Trump didn't get into power again because he was a threat to democracy. That's something we've heard from candidates and they've been speaking. But actually, one of the campaigns that he's been speaking out about even more has been Ukraine. In fact, it's also believed that he went to Ukraine to try and fight and help support Ukrainian soldiers, but he wasn't allowed to take part because he was too old and didn't have any military background. So a bit of a misguided trip there, it seems. And actually, US media have interviewed some of his family members, including in Hawaii, where his son is believed to live. He's been saying about how he's a loving father and was, very surprised to hear about this court case. But certainly this is a very unusual case, quite a strange set of circumstances that's led someone like this to in fact do what he's done, and if it is as it appears, try to take out a candidate for president in the United States. But yes, he will be appearing again in court very shortly in 2 weeks, and we're likely to see him face the full force of the law. And Caroline, it looks like now, after a second apparent assassination attempt against Donald Trump, we're entering a new and much more tense phase of the campaign.
What have we been hearing from the two candidates and from their parties?
It is a very tense phase of the campaign in these final, less than 2 months until actual election day. We actually heard a short time ago from President Biden. He spoke just outside the White House to media as he was passing by. He said to them that the Secret Service need more support, the suggestion there that they need more resources to be able to do their job. And we've also heard something similar from Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, who's a Republican, saying that Donald Trump needs better security protection. I think we can all come to that conclusion, considering this is the second attempt, on his life in just a matter of months. We've also, though, heard from both candidates. We've heard from Donald Trump himself, who spoke on Sunday, and in his statement, actually, he said he was thanking all the security officials for protecting him, the law enforcement, the sheriff. The sheriff was involved in the next county in actually arresting the suspect. He said the job done was absolutely outstanding, and I'm very proud to be American. So typically upbeat statement there from Donald Trump. He'd already said earlier in the day that he was fine. He wanted to stop the rumors. People close to him have said that he was clearly shaken, but upbeat after this incident. We've also heard from Kamala Harris, the Democrats' candidate to be president, of course, current vice president. And she said in a statement, "I'm deeply disturbed by the possible assassination attempt on Trump. To be clear, I condemn political violence, and we must all do our part to ensure that this incident does not lead to more violence," and that she's thankful that Trump is safe. And that's the kind of messaging we've heard from both Biden and Harris as well as in the previous rally in which Trump's ear was grazed by a bullet and then someone else in the crowd was hit, really dumbing down, trying to speak out against any kind of political violence. In the days after the Butler rally in Pennsylvania, Trump did speak at the Republican National Convention, and he said that it's time to unite the nation, to speak out against political violence. But I think we've seen in the weeks and months since then, both candidates in particular speaking out more strongly and criticizing the other's candidate. But at the same time, you've got these situations in which these candidates are vulnerable. So in some ways, I suppose it's not surprising that there are these calls now for Secret Service to up their game, for Secret Service to be more present, to have more resources in order to be able to protect these candidates, because we do still have, 6-7 weeks to go. There's potential for these things to happen a lot more, especially when you consider how prolific ownership of guns is in the United States, and how potentially easy it would be to target someone on a golf course, as Trump was on Sunday.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. We're going to leave it there. Our correspondent in Washington, Caroline Malone, thank you very much indeed. Up next, I'm going to be speaking to the human rights activist and philanthropist Martin Luther King III. Stay with us for that.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversations.
Well, for reaction to this, I'm joined now by Professor Martin Luther King III, a human rights advocate and son of the iconic civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was sadly assassinated 56 years ago. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Al Arabiya News. Great to have you with us. Can I just start by asking for your reaction to these two attempts on Donald Trump's life in as many months?
Well, I think, first of all, a climate has been created, and it's very tragic that in the process of a political election, that violence is attempting to be engaged in. And I think we all have to examine what is going on in our society that dictates this kind of tragic behavior. And I also think that everyone needs to speak up when something like this happens, because political violence, period, should not have a place in our society or world. However, it does exist. I think it's helpful when we can tone down some rhetoric that contributes. You can't talk about civility and peace, and yet your rhetoric is about hostility and animosity and anger from any side. So, I won't speak specifically about the former president, other than to say that we're grateful that this alleged or attempted political violence, nothing has happened. And we're certainly on high alert as a society, but our society's got to do better, because we are drifting into a pathway that is not sustainable. My dad used to talk about nonviolence and saying that we must learn nonviolence or we may face non-existence as a society. And this kind of thing, unfortunately, in terms of not understanding how to navigate in a civil way, it can be dangerous anywhere in the world. And it is happening tragically all over the world. But I think a lot of things, whatever happens in the United States, a lot of people focus on. And so if the United States is exhibiting a certain kind of behavior, then probably the world believes, okay, well, the United States is doing it, then it's all right for that to happen. And it really is not all right for uncivil behavior to occur. People get mad, so we understand that. That's okay, but you can tone down your rhetoric. You can tone down some of your activities. And we can learn how to disagree without being disagreeable. My mom and father showed us that throughout their lives, and many others in the political arena. My mom and dad were not politically elected, but they are those who've worked together in the Democratic and Republican Party over the years. That's how we've gotten anything done.
Yeah, I was going to say, from an outsider's point of view, it really does feel like the US has become increasingly polarized politically and increasingly violent in turn. So it's not just an outsider's perception. You said it there in your answer, a climate has been created in which these kind of things are happening. Who's created it?
I would say that it's been created just in general in society. This has been happening now for quite a long time. I must say that the former president is one of the largest propagators of creating certain issues because of the way he chooses to communicate. You can certainly still propagate issues in a different kind of way, and it does not exhibit this kind of crazy behavior. So it's not one side or the other. It is the total discourse. But certainly the former president has put that on steroids in terms of his activity. He'd never admit to that, of course. But you really do have to look at, Michael Jackson would say, look at the man in the mirror. Look at what you're putting out, because what you put out potentially can be what comes back to you. If you sow negative seeds, maybe negative seeds will come back to you. If you sow positive seeds, perhaps positive seeds will come back to you.
Sure. So clearly attempts on the lives of US presidents are nothing new. Really interesting to see just before that latest assassination attempt on Donald Trump, he tweeted, well, he put out on his own platform, Truth Social, I hate Taylor Swift. I mean, you don't get much more hateful hate speech than that, or much more overt hate speech than that, do you?
Well, that's what children do. When you operate from a small kid perspective, and that child needs to be corrected, by the way. So the way that he is acting as a 78-year-old man is like a 5-year-old or 7-year-old child. children will say things respond certain ways. It is totally inappropriate, unnecessary. Because someone disagrees with your political perspective, then you come out with an attitude like that. That we are better than that. We have to rise above. And if you're going to be a leader, you have to rise above, because everybody's not going to agree with you. Leadership is responsible for bringing people together, even when you disagree.
What's been the nature of your encounters with Donald Trump? How many times, and what's been the mood like on the occasions that you've actually crossed paths?
I've only met him over the years 2 or 3, maybe 3 or 4 times. And 2 of those times were before he ran for president, and one of those times was the day before he was inaugurated, which happened to be the King holiday back in 2016. Actually, it was 2017, January 2017. And at that time, it was a very interesting meeting. I thought it was instructive. We were meeting about expanding voting rights. He had said that once he was actually in the Oval Office, he was going to invite us back and we would talk more about it. But that never happened because he was not really interested in voting rights and expanding voting rights. He changed the topic to voter fraud and had been attempting to prove that fraud existed since that time. There still is very little fraud in the United States elections, less than 1%. Yes, we must clean up wherever fraud exists, if it exists. But there's not, we have created laws since that time that he was elected that make it much more difficult for people to vote, much more challenging for the precious right that we all should have. So he never was really interested, obviously, in voter expansion and voting, unless the expansion was for something that directly was going to benefit him. So I've not had any other conversations with him. I think that, whomever is the president, we must be engaged with. My father met with every president who served when he was involved in leadership, from President Eisenhower and Vice President Nixon to President Kennedy and Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson to President Johnson and Vice President Humphrey. Those were all the vice presidents and vice presidents during his tenure. One was Republican, that's Eisenhower and Nixon, and the other 2 presidents were Democratic. And he met with all of them. And I think, again, in leadership, you always have to meet with whomever is the head of state. You have to be willing to engage in the issues that you have concern about for the people of our nation.
I mean, what happened on Sunday must have automatically brought back in your mind traumatic memories of what happened 56 years ago. What did go through your mind?
Well, I think the first thing was understanding what is happening. So I didn't filter it that way because there was not an actual shooting that we could see. It was described as a shooting, and everybody wants to know, well, really what did happen. A gun was in place, a camera and other things were found, and a person was apprehended. Now, none of that did you know at first. When you first hear an assassination attempt, you wonder, what does this mean? That this has happened once before, and it looks like there's an attempt again. And what is it that is being done that creates this? And again, I think the tragedy from my perspective is that this climate is tolerated and accepted. That's why everybody has a responsibility to stand up and say, this is unacceptable ever. This is never acceptable, and it must never happen. I will say that in a climate where you have everybody can get and anybody can get guns and you have no regulations, it allows this to fester and grow. And we've got to do a better job of how weapons are dispersed and engaged. How anybody can get a gun. That's problematic, and many or some don't seem to realize that. It's fine for responsible gun owners to have guns. I think that these weapons are very specific type of weapons that have been talked about recently, which are assault weapons. Why does a person need an assault weapon, a weapon that can fire 100 bullets in so many seconds? That's kind of insane. And the definition of insanity is doing nothing or doing the same thing and expecting a different result. We have to change that by our behavior. We need to look at what kind of additional laws need to be put in place.
Just carrying on, if you'll allow me, talking about your father and what happened more than half a century ago. You were a little boy of 10 when your father was assassinated. What do you actually remember about that day?
Well, I remember actually watching the evening news at 7 p.m. On April 4th of 1968, 56 years ago. And I remember it being announced at about 7:05 p.m. that Dr. Martin Luther King has just been shot. Obviously, your heart sinks and you are frantic. I remember the four of us, we were all in the front room in our den, meaning my siblings and I, and we ran back to Mom and Dad's room, and Mom was preparing to go to Memphis to be with our dad. I remember all of that as if it was yesterday. The commotion, the many people who just started coming to our home. And I remember that whole period, which was obviously a very dark and difficult period for us. I remember a few days after Dad was killed, my mother went to Memphis to lead a march that he was to have led. And she took the three older ones of us, my older sister Yolanda, and my younger brother Dexter, and I. Bernice, my younger sister, stayed in Atlanta. And we came back, that was on April 8th. He was killed April 4th. April 9th, he was eulogized and his funeral took place. But my mother continued in that tradition and led that march. And no one had been captured for his murder. And so I remember almost each one of those days what happened, not every moment of the day. I was hoping that it was just a bad dream. But every day when I would awaken, that bad dream became tragic reality.
It's been just over 60 years since that iconic speech, "I Have a Dream." What do you think your father would make of the state of race relations in the United States in the 21st century?
Well, he'd be very disappointed, but not deterred, because he understood that, every victory that existed. I mean, the goal is to create a nation and world where freedom and justice and equality becomes real for all humankind. We've not reached that mark yet. We've achieved a number of things, certainly from an individual perspective. But when we look at a collective perspective in terms of disparities and poverty in America, when we look at the triple evils that he defined as the evil of poverty, the evil of racism, and the evil of violence and militarism, when you look at those triple evils, unfortunately, it feels as if we've not made the kind of progress that we should have. And we have to figure out, how do we create that climate so that the quality of people's lives can be risen? How do we create a society where racism is abolished and gone? How do we create a society where poverty is reduced? In the wealthiest country on the planet, the United States of America, it is unconscionable that we have thousands and millions of people living in poverty. Some would say over 100 million people who are living at or below the poverty level. That is unacceptable in a country where people have trillion-dollar budgets. There are there's a federal budget that's trillions of dollars, and you have corporation budgets that are billions of dollars. And when you add that all collectively, it's a super amount of trillions of dollars. How do you justify having poverty? There's something wrong with that, and we have not focused on that issue. And we've got to address that, because our society will not be sustainable if we don't figure out at least how we reduce it significantly. The ability is there to do that. We just hadn't identified the will. When ability and will become one, it yields results.
And in terms of fulfilling that dream that your father envisaged, do you think Kamala Harris is the sort of president who might be able to deliver?
Well, I certainly believe that the Vice President Harris, has demonstrated in a very short period of time that she intends to build a team that certainly can help to pursue that dream and vision that Dad had for all people, of freedom, justice, and equality for all humankind, creating opportunity and options, creating more jobs, addressing climate issues that exist in our society. Also reaching across the aisle and working with those who have a different philosophical point of view. That's what we need in leadership, someone who brings us together, not someone who creates barriers and builds walls, but someone who builds bridges. So I certainly believe the Vice President is demonstrated throughout her career, from being a district attorney at a local level to the state's attorney, the attorney general for the state of California, then becoming a United States senator, and then the vice president of the United States. She's consistently demonstrated the leadership that I think is needed for such a time as this.
But don't you think your father would be heartened by the fact that the United States has already had one black president who served 2 terms, and we might be just a month and a half or so away from a second black president being elected, and a woman at that? What do you think he'd make of that? Do you think he'd be surprised, or would he consider that, do you think, just the natural extension of his life's work?
No, I don't think he would be surprised at all. I think the only thing that probably would be a surprise was that it has taken this long to elect a woman. He'd be very pleased that it happens to be a black and an Asian woman. But the fact that we as a nation have purported to be all of these things, and 2024, we're just now getting to the fact where there's a good possibility, a decent possibility, that we will elect a woman. So that would probably be surprising, because he would have thought that had already happened, I believe. But I also think Dad was an optimist. And so his objective always was to create the kind of climate, as I say, where we could disagree if we had to, without being disagreeable, without diminishing someone's character, without denigrating someone. It was really about, how do we lift people up? How do we bring all boats, create that climate where all boats can rise? And that's what he and my mom did throughout their lives. That's the leadership that they provided. So again, Dad would be extraordinarily proud of what the United States is poised to do. And he'd be very concerned, however, that regardless of the outcome of this election, still 50% of the country is going to initially be unhappy. So it really is about building these bridges and bringing people in who felt left out. And that's part of the challenge. That's probably the biggest challenge. How do you bring disparate positions together and move forward in a way? Somebody's always going to be unhappy. So you can't create utopia, but you can create an opportunity for people to be heard, respected, treated like human beings, treated with dignity. That's what my father and mother were about.
And you've obviously made it your life's work to carry on promoting much of what your father believed in. And you've got a teenage daughter as well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like she's going to carry on your life's work and also that of your father's.
Well, we're very excited and proud of our daughter. She's 16 years old, and she's been involved in the struggle since she was maybe 5, 6, 7 years old. And so if she chooses to continue that work, and hopefully she will, we're going to do all we can to support her. We never tell her what to do. These are things that she's identified, from climate change to, gun regulations, responsible gun legislation, there's just a variety of issues that she herself has raised. The issue of poverty, she's very concerned about. So hopefully she will always want to work to create a better nation and world for all of God's children. And we're very pleased and proud of who she is.
Do you think she feels a bit of pressure as the granddaughter to carry that mantle?
I'm sure she does, but she carries it very well so that it doesn't seem like it. One of the things she said some years ago was she was asked, does she want to continue to work with her grandparents and walk in their footsteps? And she said, yes, I want to do that, but I also want to make my own footsteps. So I thought as a kid to think about, these are things I want to do. Not that it's not a continuation of what my grandparents did. Yes, I would say there is pressure, but I think she navigates through it very well.
She's right, isn't she? Because of course the world in 2024 is, significantly different than it was in the 1960s. So she's talking more about an extension rather than a copy-paste of her grandfather's and her father's legacy.
Well, that's correct. She has so many ideas. She's extraordinarily creative, and she's collaborative. And that's a good trait to always have when you inherently want to work with others. Leadership does demand that you make sometimes difficult decisions. But if you're able to make those decisions in conjunction with others and help others to come around to certain positions, I think that's a good thing.
Now, this might not be true, so correct me if I'm wrong if it isn't, but when you were born, your mother was reportedly concerned that it would be a burden for you to carry the name that you've carried, and you've had more than 60 years now to reflect on this as a thinking human being. Has this been a burden for you?
So, I never looked at it as a burden from a young age. I think my mother liberated me. And what I mean by that is she said, Martin, you don't have to go to Morehouse College. You don't have to become a minister. You don't have to become a civil and human rights activist. Just be your best self, and we will support you. I ended up going to Morehouse College. I have been involved in civil and human rights. So some of the things that she said I don't have to do unless you want to, I chose those paths. But I'm thankful that she gave me that freedom, because had she been putting the burden on me, saying, oh, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to be this, that would have been a very miserable set of circumstances. But to allow a child, a young person, to become themselves, and that's the kind of environment we are working to create for our daughter. But you were right, my mom was concerned in 1957. Dad was leading the Montgomery bus boycott, or in 1955, actually. He had led that bus boycott for 381 days. So Mom saw how he emerged as a leader and was known around the community and began to be known around the nation. And she didn't want me to have to carry that burden. But of course, they did choose to name me after Dad. And I think she prepared me as best I can. So I always tried to look at it as a blessing and not a burden. I think it's your frame of perspective and reference, because if you think about what is a burden, that's the way you act. But if you think about the many blessings that are derived from using your platform in a positive way, that's wonderful.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. Martin Luther King III, human rights advocate and son of the iconic civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to Al Arabiya News. I'm joined now from South Carolina by a close friend and spiritual advisor to Donald Trump, Pastor Mark Burns. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, and welcome to Al Arabiya News. Can I just start by asking you, when did you last speak to Mr. Trump, and how do you think he's feeling at the moment?
Well, yesterday, he feels obviously very strong. This is a second assassination attempt on his life. This is a clear indication that there are outside forces all the way back from 2016 until now that does not want Donald J. Trump to come back to power simply because he's one of the few politicians and few leaders to actually give power back to the American people and away from the corporate entities. And they are doing whatever they can to stop this man from doing just that. But clearly, like the book of Isaiah said, and I said this to the president, I reminded him of this. Isaiah says, no weapon formed against you will prosper. He will live and not die.
I just want to ask you where you were when you first heard this news. How did you hear it?
Well, I was with my church. We had just gotten out of church, and I was with several of my staff members at church dinner when I had got the word that there were shots fired near the president. It was before it even broke to the news. And so it was obviously alarming. And at first, I'm thinking, how could this have happened again? What is happening? How has this guy, how does an AK-47 get 200 to 400 meters away, close to the president? How is this happening? How does this keep happening? The fact that I'm very happy the Secret Service moved in quickly, returned fire in that direction, got the president on the ground, then got the president out of the area. They've done a great job in protecting his life again. But you have to ask yourself, why does this keep happening? How are they able to get even that close with the AK-47? It makes no sense to me. But I was completely alarmed, but not surprised, because they have been doing things like this. The opposition have been doing things like this for such a long time. And when you have people like Kamala Harris, who are on the national stage telling the whole world that Donald J. Trump is a threat to democracy and a threat to America, that is clearly inciting violence. That is clearly inciting and inspiring others to take up violence against Donald Trump to try to take him out. They want to complain about what happened in J6, but those liberal Democrats are extremely violent with their rhetoric, extremely violent. And causing a lot of this violence to take place against Donald Trump and people who are close to him. That is coming from the left, not from the right.
So just to be clear on this, you're attributing or apportioning blame, at least in part, to Kamala Harris for this latest attempt on Donald Trump's life.
Well, if Kamala Harris and those that are a part of her party on the left can say Donald Trump caused J6, or people like me who declared, give me liberty or give me death, which is quoted from one of our founding fathers, one of our framers, to say I incited violence and caused and inspired the J6 to take place. I said it on J5 and spoke on J6. And for them to say that, well, then, yeah, I absolutely blame Kamala Harris and those that are like her, that are calling for the death of Donald Trump, calling for the removal of Donald Trump, calling him a threat to American democracy, calling him, the number one enemy to America. Saying rhetoric like that will inspire people who are not all together to pick up their weapon and try to take Donald Trump out. And both people, would-be assassins, are not supporters of the Republican Party. They're not supporters of Donald J. Trump. They're not supporters of the conservative movement. They are people that are on the left. So this is clear indication that those words, those violent words that are coming from Kamala Harris and others like her, are inspiring people to take up arms, to do harm to Donald Trump and people who are close to him. And the scary part about it, not all of us have Secret Service, right? None of us have Secret Service. And a good job to the Secret Service agent, for protecting my friend and doing a great job to make sure that he is safe and his family is safe. But we don't have that. And to me, I think they're putting our lives in danger by consistently using violent rhetoric, like Nancy Pelosi said, and Maxine Waters said. And when you see a Trump supporter, you let them know that they are not welcome where you are. I mean, these are the type of words that are coming from elected officials from the left who are clearly using violent rhetoric to show their disdain for what Donald Trump stands for and what we as Americans and patriots stand for on the right.
Sure, I mean, they're showing their disdain for him and making no secret of it. But just to be clear, they're not calling for anyone to try to kill him, are they?
Well, I mean, again, go back and look at Kathy Griffin, the comedian Kathy Griffin. She had a head, remember that, right? These are language that are coming from people on the left. Madonna, right? Kathy Griffin, the comedian, had a head that looked like Donald Trump and had it cut off, fake blood. This has been going on for a long time. This just didn't start. We have not been saying anything like that about Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton or Barack Obama or now, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. That type of a rhetoric has not been coming from those of us on the right. That violent, evil rhetoric has been coming solely from those on the left. Go back and look at the riots that took place in Baltimore, right? When people were getting killed, violence, burning down houses. All of this is coming from the right. Coming from the left. We don't burn down our own cities in the right side. We don't. We have a protest, and it was a peaceful protest until we believe it was infiltrated by outside forces to help incite violence. But for the most part, we have marches all over the United States of America promoting our conservative movement, and we're not burning down any cities. So the violence is coming from the left, and it's just getting started. And it's a dangerous time for America now, because this is a second attempt on the leading candidate for president of the United States of America by many polls, leading, and will be the 47th president of the United States of America, the greatest political comeback in U.S. history. But yet, again, this is a second assassination attempt. It's very dangerous for America.
Sure. I mean, just to be clear as well, I mean, the polls are changing as each day goes by, and not all the polls I've seen have Donald Trump in the lead. But just going back to what you were saying, I mean, we are talking about a United States that is extremely disunited. It's a profoundly divided nation. And if I just took what you said earlier and copied and pasted it and took out the left and replaced it with the right, I mean, basically someone on the left would say exactly what you'd said, but say that all the hateful rhetoric, all the violent rhetoric is coming from people on the right. It's not us. I mean, how do we get out of this situation we're in right now? What's the way out?
Well, we first stop trying to kill Donald Trump with a bullet. Let's start there, okay? All right, let's stop trying to assassinate the man and allow him to live life peacefully and allow him to continue to help make America great again without trying to assassinate him. Number two, again, I don't quite know. I know I don't really know where you're located at, but I'm here in America and I see firsthand. I've traveled with the team and the president firsthand. I've spoken at so many of his rallies firsthand. And I know the legacy media will report things that are contrary to what actually happened. Right? They have their own agenda. Matter of fact, we just look at how ABC News treated Donald Trump during this debate. It was a complete sham. It was a complete 3-1. The ABC moderators and Kamala Harris against Donald J. Trump by himself. And he held his own like he always done. He's a lion. This is what you have experienced. Matter of fact, you having people within the ABC organization are now admitting that they were instructed to only fact check Donald Trump, never to fact check Kamala Harris. So this is exactly what Donald Trump has been going up against. So when you, the media, begin to talk about like it's fact, like, well, this is what the right is saying and this is what the media is reporting. No, absolutely not. We don't burn down our houses. We don't burn down our cities. We don't kill our own people. Right? That's what's happening on the left side when they are angry about a political decision, right? That's what's taking place in America, but yet that doesn't get reported. But the reality of it is Donald J. Trump is the only person between the death of democracy and the continuation of this republic. We believe that. Why? Because he's putting the power back in the hands of the regular American people. That's why he's so supported, even after all of these negative things that has come out against him, after all of the negative rhetoric that's coming out against him. Every media outlet is going to report that Donald Trump is losing. That's what they do. They did it in 2016, they did it in 2020, and they're going to continue to do it now because they do not desire for Donald Trump to be the president. They are all against him, and that is fact. You can look at it for yourself. But yet Donald Trump still packs out arenas. Kamala Harris says that people are leaving Donald Trump's rallies and they're bored and they're not, and he's not talking about him or them or us. The rallies are always packed. The lines are extremely long. She's describing her own rallies, right? The rallies that she has to bust people in, the rallies that she has to pay people to come and show up to because she won't have a large crowd. Donald Trump is doing this everywhere he goes, and he's been doing it for 8 years. People want Donald Trump to be the next president of the United States of America. Kamala Harris is more the same of what Joe Biden's weak Joe Biden policies, weak immigration policies, weak economical policies. We will get more of the same of Joe Biden and Barack Obama. The world wants President Trump back.
Just before that incident on the golf course on Sunday, Donald Trump put out on Truth Social some quite simple words. I hate Taylor Swift. Now, as a religious man, I wonder, as an advisor as well of Donald Trump, would you advise him to put out those kind of words? It's clearly...
Well, no, of course not.
I mean, it's hate speech, isn't it?
Of course not.
That's hate speech.
Well, I mean, that's not necessarily hate speech. I mean, that's a
he hates her.
Right. They have a right to suggest, I mean, because we get hate all the time, right? I mean, we hate the sin and not the sinner, but we hate sin. Right. And I don't call it so much hate speech, even though I would have suggested him not to say that. Right. I would have suggested if he asked me, should I say this, which he doesn't, because he's his own man. He's a pit bull. But if he would have asked me, would this been good? I would have suggested no, not because you don't want to say publicly you hate somebody, even though they hate us, even though they're very bold in saying how much they hate Donald Trump and how much they hate people like me on social media. We get rhetoric like this every single day, has been for the last 8 years. And the closer you are to the president, the more hate speech you get. But people don't talk about that. It's acceptable because the media does not like Donald Trump. So it's acceptable to call me a coon, right, which is a racially derogatory term. It's acceptable to call me, a charlatan and a grifter and a con man and all of these negative things that happens on a daily basis. I hope you die. I hope you hang yourself. I hope somebody puts a bullet in your head. I mean, these are comments that I get, and I'm not even the president. So I can only imagine what the president gets on a daily basis of how much consistent evil rhetoric that we get from the left side, who are constantly not only pushing their hateful agenda, but they are actually doing it. I mean, we had an incident where somebody opened up our gas leakage on our bus one time, right? The incidents that has happened like that over the years because people cannot stand the Make America Great Again message because it is putting the power back in the hands of the people and removing it from the corporate interests of America. That's why the people are holding up Donald Trump and the voice of God is holding up Donald Trump. I would have suggested not to say that But I can understand because people like Taylor Swift use rhetoric like this all the time to attack us. But again, if the president would have asked me, I would have said, stay away from using that type of rhetoric. But that's because I'm a pastor. He's not a pastor. He's not the pastor of the United States of America. He would be the president. He was the president of the United States of America and will be the next president of the United States of America.
Just to give the other side to the story, I mean, obviously on the Democratic side, we've heard leaders like Kamala Harris, Joe Biden saying there is no place for violence. We condemn violence. We're relieved to know that Donald Trump is safe. That's the kind of language they use. So it wasn't entirely inflammatory. But just moving on, I'd just like to ask you, as we're running out of time, do you think the security that is provided to Donald Trump as a former US president is adequate?
Well, I mean, I think there's some major questions. Again, I'm not here to speak ill against the brave men and women of the Secret Service that protect President Trump and his family, those that would take a bullet for him, those that would die for him, and those that every day put their lives on the line, and that goes for all law enforcement officers and first responders here in America. And so I'm not here to say something negative about them, but you do have to ask yourself the real question. How has this happened a second time? Why was an individual after somebody who almost killed him? I mean, very close, nipped his ear, just a hair over would have shot him right in the face, like what happened to Dr. King. And you got to ask yourself, how has a person with an AK-47 able to get that close again to Donald Trump? And clearly there's some holes somewhere that needs to be examined and needs to be plugged, because apparently they're just not going to stop. And obviously we don't operate in the spirit of fear, because God didn't give us the spirit of fear. But you have to begin to wonder, again, why does this keep happening? And I know that people will say and do things all the time, but I mean, we have a very smart Secret Service agency, and we have a very strong protective details. I've seen it firsthand. Matter of fact, I'm wearing a Secret Service pin right now that's given to me only by a Secret Service agent when you're that close to the president, and they will hand it to you as a sign of support. It's very valuable American flag pin with the star of the Secret Service on it. That I'm proud of what they've, but I'm very concerned, like millions of Americans are very concerned that how does this keep happening? Why haven't we been able to pick these people off, like in most cases, before they even get there? We're monitoring social media. We're monitoring phone records. We're monitoring things of that nature for people that come on the radar and people that are showing signs that they may be doing some type of a harm to one of our world leaders. And so, again, how did the AK-47 get that close to President Donald Trump while he's playing golf? That's the question that needs to be asked, and I hope they answer it soon.
Yeah, you raised a really important question there. We're just out of time, but I want to ask you before we go. We've heard from one of Donald Trump's other good friends, Chris Ruddy, who is the CEO of Newsmax, and he said today these attempts on Donald Trump's life may have had a spiritual impact on him. I just want to ask you, do you agree with that? And is Donald Trump a very spiritual man?
Well, again, I'm not going to get too detailed about his spiritual walk with the Lord Jesus Christ, but I can tell you he believes in the Lord Jesus. He is saved. He has accepted Master Jesus as his Lord and his Savior. He is very aware that God has spared his life on multiple occasions. And these last two occasions are no different from what God, that just shows the hand of God is upon his life. And the hand of God is sparing Donald Trump for such a time as this. And the fact that he keeps moving forward, that is a clear sign to me. And again, my private conversations with him is a clear sign that this man loves God. And he's very aware that there's a higher purpose involved that's bigger than just his name, Donald Trump. But he is a servant of the people. And he's been called by God to serve the people of this nation and to serve the people of this world. Because remember, Donald Trump in power is a safer United States of America and a safer world. We see that happen with weak Joe Biden and his weak policies. They do not respect America. Russia attacks Ukraine. China is threatening to attack Singapore. North Korea is shooting missiles over South Korea on a regular basis now. But prior to that, Donald Trump had peace. They knew he would send a picture of kill a Soleimani quickly. They knew he would send a picture of a Taliban leader's home and say, touch our American soldiers. We know where you live at. We will take your whole home out. And they knew he would do it. And so, again, like President Ronald Reagan said, it was peace through strength. Naturally, we don't want violence. We don't want no one to die. I'm not advocating for violence at all. But the reality of it is, those that live by the sword, the Bible says, will die by the sword. So there's repercussions and consequences for those that pick up the sword and try to do harm to American interests and the American sovereignty. And when President Trump was in office, the world knew that. So that made a safer world. The president most definitely knows the hand of God is upon his life and has spared him, not just in these last two occasions, but in other occasions where he could have died. But God has kept him for such a time as this and protected him with a hedge of protection, just like he did Job. There's a hedge of protection around President Trump. And as I said to him yesterday, no weapon formed against you will prosper. And I believe that. I believe God has protected him for such a time as this to help save America.
Yeah, just for the benefit of our viewers, China is threatening Taiwan, not Singapore.
I said Taiwan. I meant Taiwan.
That's all right.
So sorry.
I just wanted to make sure.
Singapore yesterday in the interview, but you're correct. It is Taiwan. Oh, I did it again.
That's all right. That's all right. I just wanted to make sure our viewers didn't think there was a geopolitical development that hadn't been.
It's not Singapore, it's Taiwan, yes.
Absolutely.
And those microchips.
Yeah, exactly. Just lastly, before we let you go, do you have a message to America to make sure we draw a line under this kind of uptick in political violence and that we make sure that there are no future attempts on the lives of Donald Trump or indeed any other prominent political figures in the United States?
Well, violence doesn't play no part, it should not play no part in American politics or American culture. It's never worked. Americans should pull from the strength of people like Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King and their nonviolence approach. That's what moves mountains. Violence never moves mountains. It only creates more bloodshed. And the message to the American people is this. This nation was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. We got to get back to that, which is peace, love, kindness to our brothers and sisters, regardless if we agree. I don't agree with the things of the left, but I am not advocating any type of violence for anyone, whether they be gay, whether they be straight, whether they be black, white, Muslim, Christian, or Jew, Hindu, it doesn't matter. I don't desire no death to no one or violence to no one just because we have a difference in ideology. So we got to get back to that. These United States of America, where we will focus more on where we're common and not where we're different. You may disagree with those on the left. You may disagree with those on the right, but wish no harm to your fellow brothers and sisters. We all are Americans. We have a difference of opinion, but that's what makes us great. That's what makes this American experience great, that we are a republic and the greatest nation in the world. And so my fellow Americans, keep peace, love your fellow brothers and your sisters. In the end, we're all Americans.
Well, that's a great note for us to wrap up on. Thank you very much indeed. A close friend and spiritual advisor to Donald Trump, Pastor Mark Burns. Thank you very much indeed.
Happy to be here. Thank you, sir.
The question on the minds of millions of people across the United States and far beyond is this: how did a gunman get that close to a presidential candidate? Well, to help us answer that question, I'm joined now by the former bodyguard and Secret Service agent who served under President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama, Barry Donadio. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on Al Arabiya News.
Thank you so much for having me.
First of all, what is your assessment based on what we know so far? Was this a failing on the part of the Secret Service, or was it a success in the sense that they were steps ahead of the gunman and they essentially prevented him from doing what he was clearly trying to do?
Right. Obviously, a success. We have a president that remained unharmed. The threat was detected. It was detected because of the extra assets that they probably assigned to the Secret Service protective detail since the Pennsylvania incident. I understand, at least it's being said, that there was some sort of an advance team or maybe a team conducting a sweep, and they detected somebody with a rifle. So I would imagine they did what I would have done, which is engaged the gunman. And when he didn't comply with any verbal order to drop the weapon, they probably shot, as I would have shot. And the rest is history, as we know. And the other thing is we have to thank also the coordination with the local police. They did an excellent job. And we have to remember the person that took the picture and relayed the description of the person as well as the license plate number. That person there is a hero, and I wish every citizen would do the same thing when they see something suspicious. There would be a lot of crime solved. So there's a lot of heroes involved here. Kudos to the United States Secret Service. They saved the president's life. Kudos to local law enforcement. We don't know what true part they also had in saving the president's life, but they certainly apprehended the bad guy, and they did it even without hurting him. So it's a win situation all the way around.
From your understanding, just how close did the suspected gunman get to the former President Donald Trump?
So I've heard between 400 and 500 meters. Now, if the assailant has a pistol, that's not as much as a threat, right? Because it would be nearly impossible to hit something that far away with a pistol. But when we have a high-powered rifle, which to me, I've seen the picture, it looks like a AK-47 with a different type of stock that was added after purchase to make it more accurate, like an accurized AK-47. That bullet there is basically a .308 short. That thing is an incredibly powerful round. It has the capability of shooting armor-piercing rounds. The magazine that was in the firearm had 30-round magazine, but that gun also has a capability to shoot a 75-round magazine and a 100-round magazine. So that was a sniper. This is an attempted assassination of the former president. And if the president got by, if they did not detect him, he would have opened up fire when the president got closer, and he may have been successful.
And when we think of a golf course, we're talking obviously about a pretty large area. I mean, that represents a real challenge, doesn't it, for the Secret Service to try to secure such an enormous perimeter of that sort of size?
Right. Distance protects a protectee like it did here. He never got close enough to really be an extreme threat to the president. Now, if we have a trained sniper, we know that a trained sniper can shoot a very long distance. This obviously is not a trained sniper. This is somebody that it looks like he put together a whole bunch of stuff to attempt a sniping event. But I don't think he had the means to pull it off. Could he have done it? Yes. But it's not impossible to secure a golf course. You get enough people out there, enough resources. Now we have drone technology. That's something that we weren't doing when I was in, at least not in any capacity that they would be able to do today. So there are a lot of resources. You just got to get them in there. And with this man, with this president, it's now become, unfortunately, fashionable for copycat people that, hey, let me take a potluck shot at President Trump, and maybe I'll hit him, and maybe I'll get on the news. But I wish people would think a little bit about that, because, this man, he decided to do this. He's going to be in jail for a very, very long time. I don't think he's going to get out, and he may die in jail. I just don't think it was all worth it. But again, the Secret Service, it can be done. It's a large area, enough agents and enough resources, enough special teams in there. They got the job done.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a little later on, but let's get to that question now about how this could inspire copycat attempts on Donald Trump's life, or indeed the lives of any other prominent political figures in the United States. Do you think that is a reality, that, based on what happened in July, here we are in September, someone potentially inspired by events in July? Do you think that was a part of it, and that we might see more of this in the future, therefore?
Yeah, anything is possible. We don't know if this is a state-sponsored attack. We don't know if this is a lone wolf. We don't know if this is a militia, an organization. We won't know for a while. The investigation is not complete. But, it breeds copycats. After the last assassination attempt, I predicted there would be a potential copycat. I still say that even now. There may even be a third attempt, and that's why the government needs to be very careful how we proceed forward with all of the candidates, not just Donald Trump. If a hair gets hurt on the head of any of our political candidates moving forward, that could be a real problem in this country. It doesn't matter which one either. Either one, the stakes are way too high. So the Secret Service is probably sitting at a big table right now with a lot of very smart people thinking exactly what I'm just saying and probably agreeing with what I'm saying. What are they going to do to up the stake and make it close to impossible to do anything, hurt, harm, injure Kamala Harris, President Donald Trump, and let's not forget Joe Biden as well.
Just looking at the profile of the suspected gunman, any obvious red flags based on what we know at this stage, which I admit is not a huge amount?
The red flag, he's a peculiar individual by looking at him through pictures, not your everyday, dad, husband. He seems to be involved in some extraordinary things. I understand he's recruiting people to go to Ukraine. These are secondhand reports, unconfirmed. They don't know for sure. It seems a little bizarre. I have heard that the media has spoken to his son. His son couldn't believe what happened, had no idea he would do this. So there's a lot of questions that are going to have to be answered moving forward. I think it's going to unfold in the next few hours, if not the next few days, and we will all learn little by little of exactly what's going on. But there is something certain. This has not really ever happened before. This should be a real eye-opener for all protective agencies around the world that protect their leaders. This stuff is getting more tense, and more resources need to be thrown to protect their protectors.
At the moment, Donald Trump gets the same level of security as any other former US president, I believe, and do correct me if I'm wrong. There are people out there, notably Congressman Nick Langworthy, saying Trump should have the same security levels afforded to a sitting president to ensure his safety. Would you back those calls?
Yeah, I would back it, because there are different levels of protection. There is the U.S. president, whoever is in the office, and whoever it is, it could be Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, or even Joe Biden. But whoever is the elected president gets the presidential security package. I cannot elaborate on the exact coverage of security and what is provided, but I can only tell you that it is different. And what I'm saying from this point on, because of the tenseness in this country and the stakes being so high, the environment, the political environment, I think they need to all have the same level of protection. Now, keep in mind that it's a huge amount of resources, a huge amount of money. There's only so many people that go around that can do certain skilled jobs. So it is a tough task. I think after this, what we're going to see, when it's all said and done, maybe 2025, you're going to see a bigger Secret Service. I think they're just going to have to do it, because this is the world we live in.
Sure. And just going back to your days as a Secret Service agent, did you ever have to deal with any comparable incidents whilst you were serving under President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama, or perhaps you're not allowed to say?
No, absolutely. We've encountered some people, even which sounds simple, but it's really an attack. Somebody jumping over the fence to get into the White House is an attack on the White House. So theoretically, if you think of it, it's a penetration. So I've dealt with stuff like that. And that is, these things can be life-changing events. You have to go out and challenge somebody who you don't know if they have a gun. They've already jumped the fence to try to come into the White House. They're on the White House property. Are they there to hurt me? Are they there to hurt the president? Do they have a gun? Do they have a bomb on them? You don't know if you're going to live if you even touch them or your next move. So this position, all men and women in the United States Secret Service, they live day by day exactly with what I said. Any of these incidents can happen at any second.
Sure, and part of being a protection agent or a bodyguard is that you would be psychologically prepared, wouldn't you, to take a bullet for the person you're protecting?
That's absolutely right. If need be, yes. But the idea would be stop the threat before any bullet has to be taken. So through our methods and operations, it shouldn't have to get to that point. Yes, things happen like we saw with President Reagan and even President Trump. You have to prepare for the unpredictable and be ready. And that's why they train in case something happens, in case a shot is fired, like in Pennsylvania. The agents are trained to evacuate him and do what you saw them do. They did everything they were supposed to do, given what the cards they were dealt on the day in Pennsylvania. So it is a highly intensive agency. The agency reinvents itself weekly. It's one of the finest agencies on planet Earth. It is a trustworthy agency. They train more than any law enforcement agency I know. I was on a special team, emergency response team. That is the best of the best. I was armed with a Fabrique Nationale P90 submachine gun to be able to repel tactical threats to the President of the United States.
A really big difference between what happened on Sunday and what happened in July is that July was a public rally. It was an event that people clearly knew about and would have known about, whereas Sunday, this was Donald Trump going about his private life, playing a round of golf. Does that suggest to you that there are some leaks and that perhaps that information found its way into the public domain by means in which it should not have done?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and that's the question I want answered. How did this man know that President Trump was on the golf course at all? Now, the president may have announced it. I don't know for certain, but he doesn't announce every move he makes necessarily. So if it's an unannounced trip and this gunman happened to be there waiting for him, there are some intelligence questions that need to be answered. The FBI is going to get hot and heavy on this, and we're going to have to find out, is this a former employee of the golf course? Does he know people? Does he know somebody in the police that maybe tipped him off and inadvertently, unwittingly, never would have expected this man to go and do this? Who knows? I'm just speculating, but these are just examples of what it could be. But that is a question that we all need to ask. The media needs to ask that question. We need to get to the bottom of it.
Sure. We're going to have to leave it there. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, though. Former Secret Service agent Barry Donadio, thank you very much for speaking to Al Arabiya News. Well, let's get some more perspective now. I'm joined by the former FBI Specialist Agent Michael Tabman. Michael, thank you very much indeed for joining us. First up, any new details emerging as to just what happened on Sunday?
Well, I've seen no new details other than the fact that we had a potential shooter, again, within 300 to 500 yards of the former president. Only this time, unlike the fiasco in Pennsylvania, Secret Service did a great job in spotting the threat and eliminating it before any shots could be fired.
So you would categorize this as having been a success story rather than a case of failings on the part of the Secret Service?
Yeah, it would be. Again, someone might ask, how did the person get in? But we have to look at, again, the totality of the facts. You have a golf course, which is an open, sprawling area, clearly not designed to provide security. It was not cordoned off as it would be for a sitting president. And it'd be very hard in reality to create a perimeter that someone couldn't somehow get through, when they're dedicated to doing so. So they did the right thing of watching his front, watching his back, scouting out for dangers and spotting that danger.
I mean, this raises a couple of questions. First of all, does Donald Trump need to change his day-to-day activities? Should he be playing golf if it's that difficult to secure the perimeter of a golf course? And the other question it raises is, does Donald Trump have adequate protection in his capacity as former US president and potentially as a future US president? What's your answer to those two questions?
On the first question, as far as golfing goes, if you're not in a secure area, if you're in a public golf course, sitting president, potential president, it is a security challenge. And now, in light of these, 2 attempts within 2 months, I think, we may have to change the protocol. But presidents golf, former presidents golf, we know that. I don't think that's going to stop, and they're not going to let themselves have their activities dictated by this threat, which is a good thing for the United States. So Secret Service is going to have to just be more aware of these threats and take the protective action as they took now. Now, as far as Donald Trump personally goes, the Secret Service has a protective detail based on their established protocol. And within that protocol, obviously, there's some, room for maneuverability. They could add more people. They could change some of the physical protective structures, things like that. But they have a protocol of what they do for a sitting president versus a candidate. I don't know that a former president has any special status. But in light of what's happened, they may have to revisit those protocols and change how they handle protection for a sitting president as well as a potential president. And in which case, then they would need certainly a bump up in the manpower, because it is manpower intensive.
And just referring to the fact that, Donald Trump was on a golf course, an unannounced game of golf, we assume. I don't think Donald Trump announces he's going to play golf. One of the questions we've been raising this evening is, does this suggest that there is somehow a leak coming from President Trump's entourage? Somehow this man, the gunman, the suspected gunman, was aware that Donald Trump would be where he was when he was. Does that raise any concerns as far as you're concerned? Does that sound to you like there's a leak?
And, I heard that, and one would consider did that happen. But even if he didn't announce it, once Donald Trump who's a high-profile individual, even as an individual, not a past president or presidential candidate, shows up with an entourage, a Secret Service agent, word is going to get out fast. Now, I don't know where this guy was when he heard about it, if he was close by, whatever, but it gets out quickly. And that would give him time to respond. Golf is a slow-moving game. Your pattern of movement is predictable. And therefore, that would have given him enough time once he heard that Donald Trump was there to grab his weapon and set up a position undetected. Again, they did the right thing, the Secret Service, with the manpower they had, scouting forward and keeping the former president secure. But I think it could have stayed a secret for very long, given who he was and what the appearance would be with this army of Secret Service agents with him.
And given, as you've said, that golf is a difficult game to provide security for, as you say, you mentioned some very good points there. It's a predictable game. You know where the player is going to be from start to finish, pretty much. I mean, given the temperature of the political climate in the United States right now, given that we're just 5-6 weeks away from Election Day, and given that the fact that the FBI is stretched pretty thin, we understand that resources aren't quite as forthcoming as perhaps many inside the service would like them to be. Should Donald Trump, therefore, stop playing golf, at least for the next 6 weeks?
That would be my personal suggestion, and I'm sure it's been suggested to him. But look at Donald Trump. He's someone who's not going to let himself get intimidated by that kind of threat. I think he kind of, likes the fact that he could say that he survived these. It's certainly good politically, and luckily nothing happened. But I don't see him backing down or changing his routine, irrespective of the advice he gets not to do so.
Yeah, I mean, some people might say that Donald Trump, being who he is, and given the climate right now, I mean, nowhere is completely safe, is it?
No, nowhere is. Even as we see the campaign, and no venue is completely secure. Again, indoors is easier to secure. Obviously, we can monitor people on the inside, but there's always an area, that someone could find a candidate. They have to go out there and press the flesh. They have to have their rallies, give speeches. And again, something like Pennsylvania never should have happened. But historically speaking, the Secret Service has been pretty effective in providing protection for our presidents. But nothing's foolproof. They just have to do a better job of staying alert and act as they did this time, providing the right security, eyes and ears open, and taking action immediately.
I just want to ask your opinion on a comment that was made by the Republican Florida Governor, Ron DeSantis, who said that people deserve the truth about how a would-be assassin was able to get so close to the former president at his Florida golf club. What does he mean by that?
Well, I think it's a fair statement. We have to, just like we had in Pennsylvania, we asked, how did the shooter get so close? In Pennsylvania, it was, inexcusable. Again, an open golf course, and I don't know this golf course particularly, not being a golfer anyway, but, it's an open, sprawling area. I don't know that they could have secured that perimeter really effectively to keep someone from getting in. So I think the answer would be just what we said, and that the Secret Service had to work effectively and efficiently within the protocol they have established for a candidate who's out there in the public playing golf. I think that would be the answer, but it's certainly a fair question.
And do you get the impression, talking to colleagues, past and present, that, the Secret Service, the FBI, is struggling, that the agencies are stretched very thinly and they simply don't have the resources, the manpower, or indeed the talent on the market to recruit enough of the right people?
Well, law enforcement in general in the United States, we know, is struggling from recruiting people, and that's more on the local police department. The FBI and the Secret Service have quite a reputation within the country and within the world. And historically, I knew in the FBI, we never had trouble recruiting anybody. We'd have multiple applicants for every position. And though I'm out of it now, I would guess that remains the same. It's a highly sought after position in law enforcement and those looking for a law enforcement career. But having worked with the Secret Service on task forces, I know that protective details are very manpower intensive. It strains them to the max. But the issue is you have a field office that maybe has to do protective detail every now and then. Not every year is an election year, but even though our current president and other dignitaries travel. But the demand for the manpower kind of waxes and wanes depending on the situation in the Secret Service. So they would have to keep a very large contingent of agents in order to address all these possibilities. But again, I think in light of what's happening, they're going to revisit their protocols, and maybe they'll have to increase the number of agents they have for protective details.
As a former FBI special agent, I know hindsight is 2020, but is there anything that you think you would have done differently from what the people did on Sunday on that golf course?
From what we know, I can't imagine what they could have done differently. Again, people could say, as the governor asked, how did he get in? But I think we've answered that question. The detail was there in full force that per protocol. They obviously were doing their job because they spotted this threat. So I can't see, just from the information we reported, what we could have done differently. But more information is going to come out, and maybe there was a lapse in security somewhere. Maybe the shooter entered somewhere that should have been secured. Again, without knowing the size of this golf course, but knowing how golf courses are, wide open area, not designed for protection. And I think it was not unrealistic that someone snuck in, but knowing that threat, the Secret Service worked with the appropriate protocol.
Okay, and just lastly, the next few weeks before the presidential election, before people go to the polls, what needs to be done to make sure that nothing like this happens to either of the two candidates again?
Now, the only way to make sure nothing like this happens is to keep the candidates under lock and key in a room. And that's just not realistic. It is a presidential election. It's a very tight race, a contentious race. Both candidates are going to be out there pressing the flesh, meeting the public, having rallies. That can't be stopped, and nor should it be stopped. We just need to make sure that we have the adequate protection and the adequate manpower to make effective protection, and just hope the candidates follow appropriate protocol and try to keep themselves safe. But understand what they are. They're politicians out there trying to get elected, and they're going to do whatever they have to do, in terms of public appearances to make that happen.
Yeah, it wouldn't make a very interesting election if they all stayed at home, would it? Well, thank you very much indeed. We're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Former FBI Special Agent Michael Tabman, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews and debate. Until then, goodbye.